About a year ago, hell, maybe even two by the time this video will come out, I made a video discussing the character Tsunatori from My Hero Academia. In the video, I discussed interest in wanting to turn the concept into a series, but that never happened, as I realized how boring it would be for me to make a series that can just be boiled down to me paraphrasing the fandom wiki. So, instead of doing that, I thought it would be cool to take the concept and take every character from that obscure category of Class 1B and do an analysis on every character there, both so I can almost that original video while replacing it with something better. I can't quite get to the point though, as I do have a couple of things I want to address. Firstly, the editing, while not being non-existent like with some other videos, will be more limited here, as I can already sense the script being longer than most others. It was my second longest. Also, I'll be using the fandom wiki as my only source. I'm saying this because I want to blame any mistakes I make here on anyone outside of myself, because that's how you describe a talented individual. Also, my older video described everything about said character, but I want to stray away from that just enough for the video to remain interesting while also not being a multi-hour long video. Also, this is a format I'll be using, and the one you'll be seeing on screen for a majority of its runtime. This is where you'll get to see each character in both their UA PE outfit, hero costume, and everyday wear. Also, this is where I'll be putting the minor details of characters, as there's nothing more useless than me verbally telling you the blood types of 20 separate characters. But now I can finally get right to it, so let's just do that already. I think it says a lot on the most interesting part of your character is a headband they wear. That's not to say that there's nothing interesting about him though, as while Awase does have his headband, his hero costume also consists of large shoulder pads and bags that he uses to store items. While he may be closed off though, that doesn't stop him from showing his true colors, although during dire situations he's able to regroup himself to become both more social and serious. This being something that is shown off best when he saves Yaoyorozu from a Nomu in the training camp arc. It's said that he's developed a crush on her afterward. But anyway, Awase's quirk is Weld, which allows him to fuse two objects together upon touching them. This is a quirk that works well both on living and non-living things, with him even being able to fuse into other people. Awase's super move, though, is Construction Done Quick Weldcraft, which along with being a mouthful, is also a move that has him take out a bunch of metallic logs to attach them to another person along the wall, immobilizing them in the process. But yeah, I'd say that outside of a training camp arc where we get to see a lot more of him, that he's generally one of the more underdeveloped characters. Underdeveloped enough for me to be interested in his future. No character will get an award for the blandest character design faster than this guy. I think that's why I can slightly relate to him, as we both don't like standing out. Even from a personality perspective too, we're not that far apart, with us both maintaining a calm demeanor while also showing some maturity, as shown when he repeatedly tells Monoma to stop fucking a Bakugo in the sports festival arc. Despite this though, he shows a far more energetic side to him in the joint training arc, likely because he wants to live up to the expectations of Honanuki, who he deeply respects for his intelligence and abilities. He's also good friends with Tetsu, who acts as the brawn to his brain, with Kaibara often being straightforward when they have a disagreement. Despite this though, his best friend seems to be Suburaba, who is one of a few people who can make him laugh. Kaibara's quirk is Gyrate, which allows him to rapidly spin his body parts to attack like a drill. To increase the power of his attacks, he wears these claw-like gloves. Despite seeming like a powerful quirk though, it really isn't, as while he didn't struggle, he still took way too long to overpower someone as useless as Ojiro. Kaibara does slightly make up for this though with his great handling of his abilities and skills in close quarters combat. Despite all this though, I'd say that I more so see Kaibara as a filler slot for the class. As while I do like the character and I'm glad he exists, I'm honestly not that interested in learning more about him. Even though I've always preferred Scizor, I can now see why people think Cypher looks so cool, with Kamakiri, who looks like a complete badass. As well as hero costume looks a bit doofy, the design as a whole is great, with the Mantis-like appearance working splendidly. All of this, though, is why it's so unfortunate that he's one of the few people in Class 1B that we know next to nothing about, with all of our knowledge on his personality being that he's very hot-headed and battle-ready. Although it is cool to note that it's because of this that he considers Bakugo to be a rival, with him training with Tetsu so he can match up to him, which is really cool given how they all have such similar personalities. Kamakiri's quirk, though, is razor sharp, which allows him to grow sword-like blades from his body. These blades are strong enough to cut through steel and are durable enough to withstand explosions, the latter of which being known due to how he was able to use his impressive reflexes to block the attack from Bakugo. In all seriousness, I am still so disappointed with how underutilized Kamakiri has been, as with such a cool design, I think he should get far more screen time than he's had. But hey, I'll be very happy when he does. Man, if you thought Tokoyami was edgier than your average middle school student, then you have definitely not seen this guy. Kuroiro definitely has one of the more unique designs, with skin that is literally colored black, and white hair just to make him stand out even more, and his hero costume just straight up embraces the edge, as even his clothes get colored in black. In battle, Kuroiro acts in a very tricky manner, liking the look of surprise he can get from his opponents, while he confidently deceives them. Due to his look too, I think it would come as no surprise, but his personality is also very similar to Tokoyami, particularly sharing the same overly dramatic form of speech, and these similarities are what start a friendly rivalry between them. Despite seeming confident though, Kuroiro also has a fairly nervous side to him, particularly in his interactions with women, which is embarrassingly relatable to me. This is best shown with his interactions with Komori, a girl he most likely has a crush on due to him being unable to speak normally to her, maintain eye contact with her, and be unable to be happy when she's interacting with other men. All this is kind of adorable too, especially with the conflict of personality between them. Kuroiro's quirk is black, which allows him to blend into either shadows or things colored black. With training though, he's able to enhance the quirk into giving him the ability to move objects he blends into. Granted, he can only do this with objects that already have the ability to move, like Tokoyami's Dark Shadow. One of the quirk's biggest strengths has to be its speed, which has been used for him to quickly eliminate Aoyama in the joint training arc. Kuroiro doesn't just have a good quirk though, as he's also able to use it fairly well, mainly because of his great intelligence, which allows him to quickly think of strategies to evade attacks while he keeps the focus on himself to stall before a more power-based hero can do a cleanup work for him. Based on his design alone, I wasn't expecting the character to be one of the more fun ones, but I was pleasantly surprised by how interesting I ended up finding him to be, and I'm excited to see what we do next with him. I'm gonna be honest when I say that I'm not looking forward to this one. Not because I dislike the character, but rather because there's likely going to be a lot more to discuss here, given how she's one of the few characters in Class 1B who's actually allowed a fraction of screen time. Anyhow, I'd say that Kendo is a very well-designed character, based purely on how you can understand who she is just by looking at her, with design aspects that show both her masculine and feminine traits, which is what makes her such a unique leader. And speaking of that, her leadership skills are very easily her best, demonstrated by how she's the president of her class, along with how she's commonly considered to be the big sister of 1B, liking to encourage others while also not letting that get in the way of any potential criticism she may have of others. And that's what makes her interactions with Monoma so interesting. While she believes that everyone in UA should be treated with respect, Monoma couldn't be a further contrast from that, which is what ultimately ends up starting her dislike for when he taunts Class 1A, resulting in her chopping him on the head to get him to shut up whenever this happens. What makes this more interesting too is that outside of that, they seem to get along well, and she even empathizes with him on the annoyance they both feel on Class 1A's overall superiority. But something you may have wondered about is why she's even considered 1B's big sister, and to my knowledge it seems to be that way mostly due to how she gives up potentially great opportunities if she feels others deserve them more. This being shown best in the sports festival arc where she gives up entering in the tournament to help propel both Shiozaki and Tetsu. And speaking of Tetsu, she seems to have a respect for his heroic attitude, and he gives that respect back to her in the training camp arc, where he helps her beat Mustard. Unlike with Monoma 2, they seem to have a far more chilled out friendship, but when it comes to her friends, she seems to have it the closest to Yanagi. He was the one who designed her outfit for the school festival's beauty contest, along with her also having gone to the same work studies as her. As for her interactions from Class 1A, the only one of note is her friendship, with Yaoyorozu. The two seems to get along fine, but what I think makes this one noteworthy is how much Kendo hates being compared to her, as they both take up those leadership roles, and while I think they're both very good at them, I think it's Kendo being in the more forgotten Class 1B that makes her feel more overshadowed. It's not until the joint training arc where you actually get to see all this though, as she tells Yaoyorozu about the comparisons, and says that she will end up beating her in a battle, and while she does, she still isn't satisfied with the way she won, which honestly just goes to show how seriously she takes her role as a hero in training. Kendo's quirk, on the other hand, pun totally intended, is Big Fist, which is a simple quirk that enlarges her hands, giving her a boost to both her power and grappling. For an example of how powerful this quirk is, she can both easily grab an entire person, and is powerful enough to break one of Yaoyorozu's shields. The full power of this quirk too can be realized in her super move, which involves her normally attacking the opponent with her hands before enlarging them, just before a strike is about to happen. Kendo overall is very intelligent, preferring to fight from a more analytical perspective, as opposed to the balls-to-the-walls styles of most of Class 1A. This is shown most prominently in her battle against Mustard, where she used the trail of his poisonous gas to track him down. Granted, this is just one of several examples, but I think her big sister role alone says a great deal on how she uses her intellect to her advantage. But yeah, this section went as expected, and I'd say that Kendo was one of the only members of Class 1B where I don't feel like they missed out on their potential, which says a great deal on how even making the occasional big role for a character can really make the difference between an underutilized character and a more fleshed out one. So far, this is a great first impression. As while the character can't really emote, I recognize how that was kind of a point to begin with, and as such find her to be hilarious. What's funnier than that is that the design is plain enough to where her blank expression becomes all the more noticeable. In fact, there is not even much more I can say about her design. I mean, she has bobbed hair with a bodysuit that accompanies her hero costume, but that's something you could notice from a first glance. But maybe she has more to her on the inside. Well, kind of, as she acts devoid of emotion too. But hey, at least we know the extent to her emotional capacity, as while she's happy, she'll say, and when she's eating her favorite food of tomatoes, that sound will get a lot louder. Despite the way she appears, though, she's not at all a moody person, and has even been shown to be kind, as seen when she looks after a passed-out Hononuki and Shiozaki in the training camp arc. It's while she does this too that Kendo also protects her by actively fighting the villains, and given how the two are on a first-name basis, they seem to be pretty close. She also sticks around with Yanagi a lot, and given how she stopped her quiet demeanor to show concern for her in the joint training arc, it seems that the two are also pretty close. Kodai's quirk, on the other hand, is size, which allows her to increase or decrease the size of the non-living things she touches. While the quirk is simple, though, we don't quite know all that she has to offer, and she's had some of the fewest time to show off what she's capable of. But even then, I don't see that as too much of a negative, as I see her in the same way as I see Mineta and Kaminari, as they're just fun comic relief characters who shouldn't overstay their welcome. Fun fact, did you know that Komori is the shortest member of Class 1B? Well, actually she's the second, but that's barring a technicality. Don't worry, Fukudashi, we'll get to you. But anyway, if you've seen some of my older videos, then you'd know that I'm pretty biased towards cute things, and Komori does not stray away from that, so of course she'd be one of the earlier characters to catch my attention. From a design perspective though, you can tell just from the differences of the left and middle artworks that she's had some minor design changes over the seasons, with her head becoming significantly less oval-shaped, and is now one of the characters with the roundest head shapes. It may be a dumb detail, but I promise when I say that it will come into practice a bit later. Anyhow, on to the more relevant details, Komori has a very mysterious appearance, with her hair completely obscuring her eyes, with them only showing up when she's in battle or out in everyday life, with a star showing up whenever you do see them. All this too may suggest that she feels more comfortable in those environments. As for the hero costume, it's pretty simple. It's supposed to look like a mushroom, and it does that well. Komori's earlier design implied that she'd be more shy too, but the later iterations contrast this, with her showing a lot more confidence. Granted, this makes more sense as it would initially seem, as it seems that while she's a lot more closed off and shy in situations outside of combat, she seems to be a lot happier upon seeing the mushrooms she creates. And this is just made all the more obvious by the fact that she knows the scientific names of every mushroom. Surprisingly though, causing chaos isn't her only personality trait, as she shows a kinder side to her when telling Tokoyami to get proper medication upon getting a little too carried away using her quirk on him. It seems too that they have a minor friendship going on, as after the battle they're in, she's seen asking him for pictures of his work studies of hawks. Komori is also completely unaware that Kuroiro even has a crush on her, which very much falls in line with everything I've set up to this point. Despite complimenting him for his ability and intelligence, it seems as though she sees him as nothing more than another classmate, though only time will tell what she does when she does find out, and it's when that happens that there will be a lot more to unpack with what is so far a very simplistic character. Komori's quirk is Mushroom, which allows her to spread spores from her body that eventually turn into mushrooms upon hitting a solid surface. There's not much of a limit as to where the mushrooms can grow, with them lasting from about 2 to 3 hours. She also uses a squirt gun support item to help her mushrooms grow and spread faster. While Komori's quirk is pretty useless in one-on-one combat, it makes for an excellent support quirk, being able to distract and eventually immobilize opponents with the use of her mushrooms. In order for her support role to be effective, though, she has to spray her allies with anti-fungal spray, which also makes her pretty useless against ambushes. In a pinch, however, she can spread mushrooms into someone's throat, which sounds just as painful as it most likely is. While in battle, Komori is extremely situational, but in terms of her character, I like what they've got so far, and I'm fairly curious to see what they do with her next. I'm going to be honest when I say that few of her characters embody missed potential more than Shiozaki. While having a decent role in the Sports Festival arc, her time has kind of ended after that, with her only personality trait being that she's religious. Like, man, this character was buried so hard. From a design perspective, though, she's pretty interesting, with a head consisting of vines. And while she can control the length of her vines at any point, she seems to have them go down to her waist during most of the times we see her. Shiozaki values modesty, as seen when she calmly tells Present Mike why she doesn't like being referred to as an assassin. And that's just one example of how she frequently likes to make her intentions known. It's also extremely likely that she's religious, most likely Christian given the names of her super moves. Granted, despite everything I've said up to this point, she seems to have a more vindictive side to her too, as shown when she tells Shishida that the fires of hell should relieve Class 1A of her sins. And speaking of Shishida, they seem to be good friends, although he is bothered by the religious side of her, and given how that's pretty much the only side to her, I can completely understand why. But that's not the end to her interactions, as Kaminari has straight up hit on her in the past. Granted, I struggle to believe that this is a crush, given his personality. Shiozaki's quirk is Vine, if it wasn't obvious enough, which gives her the ability to use her hair to attack, defend, and grapple opponents from various ranges. She can also detach her vines, and don't worry, they do eventually grow back. Her 3 super moves are Via della Rosa, which covers the entire ground of vines, trapping opponents who step on them, Crucifixion, where she does everything in her power to immobilize just one opponent, and Faith's Shield, where she uses a bunch of her vines to protect herself from a particularly big attack. Shiozaki specializes in stationary combat, being weak against those with fast quirks, but being incredibly strong against those who can't prevent her from setting up her defenses. Overall, I really hope they decide to do more of this character, as in her current state she's not really that interesting, but is saved by an intriguing quirk and design. What I find so weird about this character is that I'm somehow 2 inches taller than him. Like, he's supposed to be a beast, and I'm not even that tall for God's sake. Outside of his height, though, the rest of his design fits the beast theme very well, with many saying that he looks like the beast from the classic Disney film, which wouldn't surprise me given how much we already know about Horikoshi's interest for one particular Marvel under the Disney umbrella. His hero costume sees him without a shirt, likely because of how it would be pointless to give him one anyway, along with a far darker look than usual. When transformed into his beast form, his hair, height, and fangs grow in size. Shida has a very formal way of living life, trying to respect others and use words like sir and miss to describe others. Granted, when he uses his quirk, he throws this out of a window, being a lot more energized and battle ready. Shishida's quirk is Beast, which transforms him into, well, I think it's kind of obvious. When transformed, he has enough strength to throw people through walls, evade surprise attacks with his enhanced speed, withstand the jolts of electricity along with other strong blows, and smell others from large distances. Despite the absurdly strong qualities of this, though, it does make him more reckless. However, this isn't even that bad of a thing, given how he's routinely seen as one of the toughest members of 1B to fight one-on-one, and seeing how Class 1A pretty much had to solo target him in the joint training arc. Shishida is also extremely intelligent, being able to formulate plans even in his beast form. His super moves, though, are Roaring Rage, where he leaps into the air to attack with his claws, and Rebeast, where he transforms back to normal to avoid an enemy attack. Overall, though, I'm kind of satisfied with what we know about this character so far, as we've gotten to see how interesting he is in battle, even if his personality is pretty one-note. At first, I only really saw Shota as some short and fat kid, but luckily for him, his spot on the joint training arc helped to prove me wrong. I think it is funny though, but his hero costume makes an attempt to make him look buff, although he does interestingly have a scouter too, but we'll get to that later. What I won't get to later, though, is how surprisingly likable he is, as he's extremely humble, refusing to take credit for anything he feels is undeserved. He also won't harbor any ill will towards anyone, as seen when he compliments Ishido for beating him. It's for all of these reasons that I think it comes as no surprise that he's both great friends with Ida and the vice representative of his class. Shota's quirk is Twin Impact, which allows him to give 2 blows to an opponent while only hitting them once, with the second impact being significantly stronger than the first. He can initiate the second impact whenever he wants, so he wears a scouter and gloves that can help him see where he still has to hit the second impact, so he can do so at the most optimal time. This quirk can be used both in hand-to-hand combat mobility and support, but if Shota wants to make the most out of his quirk, then he needs to develop some great skills, and thankfully he has, with the best one easily being his leadership. This allows him to think of quick plans, and be a supporting asset, most notably when he helps elevate Kodai's quirk, but also when you see both her and Yanagi following through with his plans. Most impressive, though, may be his reaction time, which allowed him to be on more even footing with even Mineta. He also possesses great intelligence, as he was able to recognize when Ishido blocked one of his attacks, even when he couldn't see her, having to rely entirely on a scouter. But yeah, I'm honestly surprised by how much I liked this character. I kind of expected him to be a filler character, but I don't by now understand why he was originally planned to be in Class 1A, as he's quite a good one. Despite me being a big fat weeb who's completely obsessed with nearly every facet of Japanese culture, I'm still extremely proud to be an American, and as such am obnoxiously patriotic. Like, I shit you not, if my PFP wasn't of a Lucario, then my PFP would instead be of a bald eagle with a channel banner of an American flag and a description with the lyrics of America Fuck Yeah. Although this was really just my big dumb way of saying that I really like how they wrote an American character into the series, as well Horikoshi's love for American superheroes may have made Tsunatori an inevitable conclusion. I still ended up liking it enough to make an entire video discussing the character. But that video is terrible, so I'm going to instead one-up that video and do an analysis of Tsunatori that's actually worthwhile. From a design perspective, though, I would consider her worthwhile, as she stands out a lot compared to the other characters with her hooves, horns, and cartoon-like eyes. Her hero costume, too, is just a massive set of references to horses, the most notable of which being a saddle, which could potentially show some use, given how she occasionally runs on all fours. Tsunatori, however, is rather timid, given how she struggles to fit in as a foreigner in a Japanese school. It's yet to have been confirmed at what time she moved to Japan, but given how she still occasionally speaks English, particularly when angered, it's likely that it was pretty recent. Despite this, though, her class still treats her with kindness, except for Monoma, who abuses the fact that she doesn't know much Japanese, along with her naive nature to insult Class 1A without even knowing. Despite this, though, she's also shown to be very thoughtful, perseverant, and observational, although that doesn't stop her from insulting Shoji for his very odd appearance. Even with this, though, she has still been able to make a good friend in Fukudashi, who she feels most comfortable obsessing over anime and manga with, although that doesn't really mean she shies away from discussing it with the rest of her class, as they have all learned a lot about the subjects due to her, which is honestly a hilariously accurate representation of what would actually happen if a weeb moved to Japan. Tsunatori's quirk, though, is Horn Cannon, which allows her to use the horns on her head as a projectile, while new ones grow on her head. She can control up to 4 at a time, either using them as a weapon, a defensive tool, or as a utility option to help her move either herself or someone else in the air. And speaking of that, her super moves are Horn Dash Hammer, where she helps bring a teammate to an opponent, and Thunder Horn, where she aimlessly launches horns at an opponent while saving the controllable ones for a sneak attack. Tsunatori is a very tactical fighter, being able to think under pressure and think of solutions even when they seem slim. But overall, Tsunatori is one of the most interesting characters in the entire series, and I very much want to know more about her. Looking at his design, you'd think nothing about him, until you look at his eyes. For some reason, I just love the way his eyes are shaped. It's got such a charming yet funny look to them. Saburaba, however, is extremely competitive, and looks to be the best at everything, scoffing at when his rivals can match up to him. It's for that reason, too, that I think it comes as no surprise that he's good friends with Monoma, who's seen paired up with him in the Sports Festival arc. He's also seen paired up with Kaibara in the same arc. and it's later noted that we're good friends, with him being one of the few people who can make him laugh. He also notably could have a crush on Awase, as after he's defeated by her in the joint training arc, the only thing that seems to be on his mind is how she used her tongue to take him out. It's unknown whether this is because of a crush, however, as he could just be the class's version of Mineta. Suburba's quirk, though, is solid air, where he can solidify the air he breathes to protect himself from opposing attacks, with the air staying in the same spot unless it gets broken. At first, he was about as good as using this quirk as I am at forming relationships, with Bakugo being able to break one of his shields with just his fist. But by the point of a joint training arc, he was able to improve this so quickly that now the shield requires several hits from a metal pipe to be broken. The shields are also soundproof, making him good against characters like Shinzo and Jiro. His super move, though, is Air Prison, which makes it so he can trap his opponent in a box of air, this supposedly being more durable than his air normally is. But yeah, I actually really like this character, and I hope I get to see him more often. I'm excited to see what we do with him next. Based on the fact that he has the same first and last names, along with having quite a few glaring similarities to Kirishima, that he'd just be a joke character, which is why it's so odd to see that he's gotten more screen time than most of 1B. Although if we were to base that just on his design, then I'd understand why, mostly because of his weird eyelashes, which help him stand out quite a bit, although I'd describe his personality as a far more exaggerated version of Kirishima's, just without the character development. Because of this, he's hot-headed, blunt, stubborn, confident, and while well-intentioned, often doesn't go into a fight with a good plan. This is why he respects Kendo and is good friends with Honanuki, as they both have strong leadership qualities to make him the best version of himself. Despite his good qualities, though, he doesn't always assume the best of others. As well, he sees Bakugo being an arrogant dickhead, as always. He assumes that all of Class 1A is like that, and as such, doesn't treat them with kindness until he learns that most of them are pretty chill. His best friend here being Kirishima. As while he hates being compared to him, he respects him for his heroic attitude, even cheering him on in the sports festival arc. He also seems to have a good respect for Todoroki, as seen when he targets him in the joint training arc. Despite how strong he may seem, though, he's also fine with showing some vulnerability, as seen when he apologizes to his teacher with tears in his eyes for not doing what he can to make Class 1B superior to 1A. Tetsu doesn't let his vulnerability turn into weakness, however, as he always does what he can to protect his classmates, taking a bullet for Kendo and ensuring that Shiozaki is safe before attacking any villains. Speaking of her too, they seem to be good friends, although his relationship with Monoma is a lot more weird, as the two seem to get along, although he doesn't seem to like his mindset on 1A, as he thinks that if Kendo never stopped him from going off the deep end, that everyone in his class would be just the same as him. Tetsu's quirk, though, is Steel, which functions identically to Kirishima's Hardening, which gives him a boost to their attack and defense, with them both being able to withstand bullets while tearing through steel. Despite these similarities, though, Tetsu does have a few notable differences in how this quirk works, with him needing a diet of iron to make his quirk stronger, having a resistance to heat, even if too much heat will cause him to melt, and being vulnerable to magnetism. Tetsu's super move is Steel Fist, where he runs up to his opponent and uses that momentum for a strong jab. Even with his hot-headed personality, though, Tetsu is at least good at formulating a plan for a battle, as shown with his bouts against Mustard and Todoroki. But even with this, Tetsu's most important quality has to be a strong will, as he'll go into any challenge no matter the consequences, and will never surrender if it means saving someone else's life or looking strong. But I gotta stop talking about him sometime, though, so I'll just say that I like Tetsu a lot, and that it's where his differences to Kirishima lie that just continues to make me wonder what areas he differs from him. So that's a success in my book. I was really looking forward to getting to see more of this character, as I really liked her design, and also because they hyped her up as one of the most powerful people in her class, only for her, along with the rest of her team, to get swept by Bakugo in no time, which is just such a disappointment, as while it does make Bakugo look awesome, it does nothing but make her seem weak, especially when she was acting as the leader of her team. At first glance, though, the most interesting aspect of her seems to be her sharp teeth, and hair that weirdly resembles that of snakes, Upon further discovery, though, you'd see a very outgoing and confident person who takes great pride in leading others. This clearly being shown best in the joint training arc, where her teammates essentially had to rely on her instruction for a chance to win, with them being able to do so due to a knowledge that she's very serious, careful, reliable, and able to think of strategies for victory. Her biggest flaw, though, is that she can be a little too confident, and struggles with being adaptable when a plan she forms doesn't end up going her way, this being the thing that ultimately allows Bakugo to defeat her. But even with that weakness, she's still one of the most respected and powerful people in her class, even if someone like Monoma will happily overrate her abilities. It's for all these reasons, too, that she's become the second student in her class to get in through recommendations. But in order to get in through recommendations at all, then you have to have a particularly good quirk, and Tokage absolutely does, with her quirk being Lizard Tail Splitter, which allows her to split her body into 50 different pieces. All these pieces can levitate and be freely controlled by her, with them being able to regenerate once destroyed, allowing her to continue to be on the offense. What makes this quirk so powerful, though, is in the many ways it can be used, with its applying to offense, distraction, and recon. Add that with the absurd mobility of her quirk, which gives her, and you'll see a force to be reckoned with. The regeneration process is difficult, though, so she can be worn down with time, with that being her only major weakness. In order for the quirk to be used without the FBI opening up, however, she has to wear a hero costume made out of her own cells, so that her hero costume can regenerate with her. Even with that sweep, though, I'm still very glad that there ended up being a lot to discuss with this character, and I'm very intrigued to see where she'll end up standing by the end of the series. I actually wanted to dress up as Fukudashi for Halloween one year, but sadly forgot about the idea, being a pothead for that year instead. And after hearing that, you may have some questions, but I believe it's funnier to leave them unanswered. But anyway, this was the technicality I was talking about when discussing Komori, as Fukudashi, when shortening his speech bubble, is the shortest person in Class 1B. But it's that design that made me want to cosplay him, as I find the idea of having a speech bubble for a head to be fucking ridiculous. As for his hero costume, it's just a cornucopia of comic book and manga references, with paint-canned armor, a ruler belt, and a piece of paper for a mask. And all of this just further reiterates the absurdity of the character. And this is played up with more, as he's seen over-embellishing the impact of his attacks in the joint training arc. Outside of that, though, there's not much else known about his personality outside of how he likes to make children smile, and how he seems to have a very limited vocabulary, preferring to speak of his speech bubble. Fukudashi's quirk, though, is comic, which gives him the ability to materialize any of the words he speaks, with the words having the same effects of what they'd suggest. The only major weakness of it seems to be that his throat starts to hurt a lot after using it for too long, which may explain why he doesn't speak much. The quirk isn't just good, though, as Fukudashi also has a very good grasp of it, with him playing an extremely important utility role in the joint training arc, of him helping Komori's mushrooms grow faster, defend against Aoyama's laser, and separate a star player of Yaoyorozu from her teammates. It's this grasp that got him an internship with the equally goofy hero Wash, to help him improve his communication skills. Honestly, this character has a ton of potential, so I hope they don't waste him and give him a good role later on, because I've yet to have enough to laugh at. Being the final recommended student in Class 1B, Hononuki has a lot of expectations to live up to, which is why it's a miracle that he has lived up to them, becoming one of the most respected people in his class. Although his design is definitely very odd, as he looks far more like a titan than a person, with his teeth being set outside of his skin, his pupils being notably less detailed, and his skin being colored very differently. It's unknown as to why he looks the way he does, as it very much doesn't seem to be due to his quirk. What sucks about this, though, is how he wears a helmet in his hero costume, which takes a lot from his very unique appearance. There's a reason for this, though, as he has a snorkel inside of his helmet, which allows him to breathe in the mud he creates. Outside of that, though, the rest of his costume seems to exist solely as armor, but outside of his appearance, Hononuki hates to lose, being very competitive. That won't stop him from giving others opportunities, though, as seen when he lets Tetsutetsu and Shiozaki advance to the tournament of the sports festival arc, just like Kendo did. And speaking of Tetsutetsu, they seem to get along well, with him acting as a leader to him. Hononuki is also very calm and understanding to those he trusts, as seen when he tries to make the most out of others' strengths. Hononoki also has a good grasp on fight or flight, given how he retreated from Ida to play a more defensive game plan. But he also doesn't like to put up with Monoma's complaining, encouraging him to be upfront with 1A, which he does out of respect to him, until Kendo hits him on the head as always. Hononoki's quirk, though, is softening, which allows him to soften the things he touches to have the same effects as quicksand. He can swim through the material, and can also undo the effects by touching them again. Hononoki is very intelligent, being very good at buying time to stretch out his flexibility and think of solutions to problems while leading others. Hononoki is also bilingual, making him able to collaborate with Tsunatori better than anyone else. I'm gonna be honest when I say that I'm surprised we don't know more about this character, and that I'm excited to see more of him in the future. Now you've all heard the fucking cum joke, so I'm not gonna repeat it. Instead, what I'm gonna do is use that as a way to unsubtly segue into how I thought this character was a joke. And I turned out to be right, as he only really appears to show off how weird of a character he is. But Bondo is at least able to stand out in a good way in how he's the tallest person in 1B, with only Kamakiri even coming close. He also stands out in how he's able to be very muscular while also being very thin, with large hands to boot. But obviously none of that even comes close to his oddly shaped face. Like, how the fuck does he even see? Because if those are nostrils instead of eyes, then this character is so much more disgusting than he would otherwise be, and if those were eyes, then how the hell does he even breathe, given how his mouth is shaped oddly too? But I've just kind of learned never to ask questions like that when watching media, as it's typically more relaxing to watch anything with that mindset. And I think Bondo would agree with me, given how he's described as a gentle giant. He's a bit shy, but when others get to know him more is when a positive opinion forms on him, as he's able to crack even the deadpanned Kodai to get a friendship out of her, a rarity. Bondo's quirk is Semidyne, which allows him to shoot glue out of his eyes, nostrils, I don't fucking know. He also can control how quickly the glue dries. Bondo's super move is Glue Squall, where he shoots his glue into a larger area than usual. He can also use those muscles I talked about earlier to lift people out of danger. But yeah, this is one of the more lame characters, who's entirely carried by how goofy he is, along with his heartwarming personality. I honestly don't think much will be done with him in the future. So you know how I said that Kendo would take forever to talk about? Well, Monoma will take at least twice as long, and I'm predicting that it'll be pretty redundant too. But we have to start somewhere, so I'll start with commenting on his blonde hair, which wouldn't be a notable detail if he weren't in an anime, but since he is, it has brought many to believe that the character is rich, given how that's a common theme among blonde Japanese characters. It's for this reason that many of the girls in UA found him attractive, although they'd admit that his personality is so full of red flags that it removed his chances with almost all of them. In his hero costume, he wears a suit with 2 long tails, and when combined with his hero name of Phantom Thief, it leads me to believe that he's a big Persona fan. He could also be a JoJo fan, as when watching the joint training arc with my friend D he noted that he tends to JoJo pose a lot. Granted, I'm not a JoJo fan, so I don't know if the image on screen is at all relevant. But even with his good traits, such as his intelligence, Monoma's disdain for Class 1A seems to outweigh all of his other traits, as he's seen as disagreeable and sarcastic to the opposing class. And while all this may stem out of a place of jealousy, as can easily be seen when he laughs at or mocks 1A for any failure they have. He'll even degrade himself to get a shot at 1A, as seen in a training camp arc where he makes fun of the amount of people who had failed the final exams, even though he was the only one in his own class to fail. And it's for all of these reasons that people will jokingly call him mentally unstable. He claims that the real reason he does all this, though, isn't out of jealousy, but because he doesn't want the rest of UA to learn from a class that constantly gets into trouble, ignoring the fact that they can't control the League villains attack them. Thankfully, though, Kendo is always there to stop Monoma whenever he gets too out of control. And whenever she's gone, Awase. It's for this reason that the rest of the class is able to maintain a friendly rivalry with the class, as opposed to the hostile one that he has. Neither have any ill will towards each other, though, as when they aren't in conflict, they seem to get along well. He also seems to get along well with most of his class, too, putting aside his envy to show a far more compassionate side to him, as he's seen as very encouraging to them, only making his criticism constructive. He also shows great overconfidence in his classmates' abilities, as seen with Komori and Tokage. He's also capable of acting normally outside of a school setting, but another person he'd show great overconfidence toward is Tetsu, who trusts him very much, as seen in the Sports Festival arc. It's noted that Tetsu, along with most of his classmates, also share a want to up to stage 1A, even if they don't take it as seriously as Monoma does. Weirdly enough, too, his teacher Vladkin also seems to feel the same way as his students, and it's for that reason that Monoma holds a deep respect for him, with it only growing after he shares a heavy 1B bias while commentating in the joint training arc. But even after saying all this, I think I should note that Monoma doesn't act in the way he does just because he's an asshole by nature, but that it could also be a result of years of bullying he received for wanting to be a hero even without a flashy quirk. It's because of this that he's grown a disdain for 1A occupying the spotlight, as even after the years of effort he put in to even make it to UA, he still feels like he doesn't get the credit he feels he deserves. Despite handling all this, though, with little maturity, he's still able to accept the reality of the situation and think positively when he says that despite not being the main character, he could still be the side character who outclasses them. Even then, though, Monoma isn't as sure of himself as he would like you to believe, and as part of his hate for 1A may be caused out of fear, as seen with a provisional license exam arc, when he sighs in relief due to not having to fight them. It's due to all this, though, that he likes and respects Shinzo, since they had to go through a very similar childhood. It also seems that Shinzo doesn't quite reciprocate those same feelings, though. But as after all this, but I've yet to explain who in 1A he has the largest grudges against. So let's just start with Bakugo. Now it's because of Bakugo's unlikability, arrogance, and violent nature that Monoma views his entire class that way. But since Bakugo exposes those traits the greatest, it's what ends up making him dislike him more than any other person in the class. But the person he dislikes more is Midoriya, who he dislikes for the same reason as Shinzo, as they both have a false perception that Midoriya is a naturally gifted person, despite the hard work he had to put in to become a hero. It's due to that misunderstanding that leads Monoma to believe that 1A as a whole can slack off without putting the effort necessary to become a hero, like he and his classmates have to. Despite all this, though, all Midoriya can really feel for him is pity, despite how much of an asshole he can be. Surprisingly, though, Monoma doesn't seem to harbor any resentment towards their teacher, Aizawa, even though he finds Monoma's attitude to be very disrespectful. But now, after nearly 1,000 words, I can finally talk about his quirk, which is copy. This is a quirk that allows him to copy someone else's quirk for up to 10 minutes after making contact with them. He can currently hold up to 4 quirks at once, even if he can't use them simultaneously. The only quirks he can't seem to properly copy, though, are ones of a stored resource, like the power of One for All, the body fat of fat absorption, and the Horn of Rewind. To prevent confusion over what quirks he's able to copy at a time, he holds 4 stopwatches in his hero costume, even if he only has 3 visible, this being able to catch others off guard. Now, while this quirk isn't inherently good at hand-to-hand combat, it is still good at catching the opponent off guard, given how he can switch between what quirks he uses at will, as seen when he does that twice with Midoriya. In order to use this quirk effectively too, you had to be both great with memory and adaptability, which Monoma absolutely is, given how he was able to use both the explosion and hardening quirks with great precision, while despite the limited knowledge he had on how each quirk functions. Monoma is also extremely intelligent, with him being able to guess that the obstacle race of the sports festival arc was just a preliminary round, with him using this knowledge to not get first place but rather to study the quirks of those ahead of him, while also keeping a low profile to keep those same people oblivious to his own abilities. He was also able to detect the strategies of Uraraka in the same arc, with that being something that even some pro heroes couldn't do until much later. He was even able to conduct a strategy to help Shinzo catch Midoriya off guard in the joint training arc, which included him insulting Bakugo and using Shinzo's artificial vocal cords persona cords to mimic Uraraka's voice. Overall, this is a character that I was very surprised to find was so interesting. I mean, given how much I talked about him, and given how I talked about him for so much longer than anyone else, I guess it will come as no surprise that I very much am craving to see more of him. I can understand why someone would like this character with her ghost-like qualities, but she's had so little screen time that I can't really appreciate those qualities. But yeah, she was clearly designed after ghosts, as her hands are in a position commonly seen in ghosts, and she has hair colored in white, which is a color most commonly associated with them. In her hero costume, though, she wears a mask and kimono. I don't know if that's a reference or made purely for aesthetic purposes. All we really know about how she acts, though, is that she is very quiet and has a very complex form of speech. Despite this, though, she hasn't struggled much with finding friends, as she's quite close to Kendo. who she's designed an outfit for in the School Festival Arc's beauty contest. They've also participated in the same work studies together, and are on a first-name basis. Yanagi's quirk is Poltergeist, which allows her to telekinetically move the objects around her. It is unknown how many objects she can move at a time, and what the maximum speed of the objects are, but what is known is that she can carry objects of a weight that is roughly the same as the average person. But yeah, I'll probably like this character over time, but for now she is the embodiment of lameness in my opinion. Man, Class 1B must be a beacon of diversity, because there's not only an American character, but also a Chinese one, meaning that they also eclipse Class 1A, who has only one non-Japanese character in the form of the French Aoyama, who he shares the same voice actor with in both English and Japanese. From a design perspective, though, there's not too much going on for Rin, outside of how he has reptilian-like eyes. His hero costume, on the other hand, looks very Chinese. Granted, there's not much more I can add on to that, because outside of America and Japan, I'm about as culturally inept as it gets. And even then, saying that I know about Japanese culture is a stretch in itself. Like, watching anime doesn't mean you know about Japanese culture. Rin seems to be very serious, mostly portraying a straight face. Ren's quirk is Scales, where he can grow scales from his body to use defensively or as an offensive weapon, either in melee or ranged combat. It should also be noted that he can shoot the scales at a great speed and accuracy, along with how the scales' defensive capabilities will bear off after being exposed to enough force. Rin also wears scale gauntlets to help make them shoot faster. He uses these most prominently in his super move Sprouting Scales, where he takes the capabilities of the gauntlets to their next level. His other super moves are Reverse Scale, where he has his scales protrude outward to make for a melee weapon, and Within One Scale Kaibara, where he has the scales cover his entire body, making for a full set of armor. On top of that, he's also reasonably intelligent, with him giving advice to others in the sports festival arc. Overall, Rin is just kind of okay to me. His quirk is cool, but his personality isn't really interesting to me. Although, only time will tell if the character becomes super interesting or not. Well, that sucks. I wanted to make this my longest script, but it was 1,000 words away. But something good did come from this video, as working on it is what finally got me to review the entire series. So if you're interested in that, then I would implore you to watch that video. But on the video itself, I initially didn't take the idea of finishing it too seriously, but was amazed by how much fun I was having. So, while working on it, I decided to just finish it, along with a review video, which finally allowed me an outlet to talk about how much I absolutely love this series. But I gotta end sometime, and I don't quite know how to end it, so bye, I guess?